Good evening, Father Murr, and I wonder if we're on a good link right now.
I hope so. Good evening to you, Dr. Moynihan.
Well, thank you. The conversations between myself and Father Charles Murr are are open to the public. We have some people viewing us, and we appreciate everyone who is tuning in. Father Murr, we are on January 31st, 2024, and we're getting a little older, you and I, and we've spent a lifetime in this 20th and 21st century of human history, and we've watched some of these events, which all of our fellow watchers have lived through as well. And in the church in particular, you worked in Rome in the 1970s. You worked in Mexico. Later in the 80s, you became a good friend of Cardinal Gagnon, who did a report at the request of Paul VI during the 1970s about possible infiltration of the Vatican by people not interested in the best interests of the church. And I myself went to Rome in the 1980s, and I started to cover the Vatican. I got to know Cardinal Ratzinger, who became Pope Benedict. And I also got to know Cardinal Gagnon. One of the things we've repeated over and over is that the report of Cardinal Gagnon ought to be published by the Vatican all these years later, 60 years, 50 years later now.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I've written to different people that I know in the Vatican. Anybody that I talk to, asking them to push this matter, get no response from anybody in authority.
Yeah. And we're also confronting a lot of confusion in our world. We have all sorts of criticism and division, really, honestly speaking. And yet, tremendous hope. And there's very many good people. There's many people of goodwill. And I'd like to talk about that and how all of us can look at the confusion and even the frightening evil of our time, the corruption of our time, and at the same time, keep our faith, keep our hope, keep living with charity. And I wondered if you could lead us in this reflection, because we're going to be coming in another month to see you in Spain, where you are. You're in southern Spain, and you lived in
Yes,
Mexico.
you poor things. We're getting ready for you.
Yeah, we're going to have a retreat with you. We're retreating from all of this, and we're going to turn the internet off. Although maybe we could open that up. We'll have a couple of sessions where people can come to the retreat by the internet. I don't know if you agree with that.
Well, we'll see. I play it by ear. I'm open, Robert. I'm open to anything. Whatever. You know what? Whatever works to get, and I mean this most sincerely, to get Christ's salvific word out. If any way that can happen, I'm in.
Okay, so let's go directly toward that salvific word and see how it meshes with what we thought as children, what we thought in parochial school, what you thought as a seminarian, what we think in the modern world, in this democratic, liberal society we live in. What is Christ's salvific word, and how have you experienced it during your lifetime?
Well, let me begin addressing that question with some concerns of your own, because you've sent me some emails during the week for me to read and articles to read and to consider. How should I want to do this tactfully, because I really don't want to offend anybody. That's not what I'm trying to do.
Okay.
But let me just say this. There are a lot of people. Well, first of all, let me tell you this, Robert. I'm hearing from all sorts of people all over the world who listen to this program. I don't know if they're writing to you. I should suggest that they should. But it's amazing from everywhere. I just received this morning a letter from China.
Really?
Yes, from a whole family who seem enchanted with this whole program. They really do. They listen to it every week.
We have we have Margaret Green writing us, "Good afternoon from Dublin, Ireland." And I don't mean to interrupt our discussion.
Yes.
Someone criticized me, but the fact is we do have people in probably 10 or 20 different countries watching.
Well, it's pretty amazing. It really is amazing, and the feedback is very encouraging too. It seems, Robert, that we're actually making sense to a number of people.
Okay, Moynihan and Murr.
Yeah, there you go. Well, do I always have to get bottom billing?
No, I'm gonna.
No, I'm kidding. Listen, let me get back to the subject that I was trying to approach, and I'm trying to do this tactfully. People today, understandably so, are concerned about the end of the world. They're concerned about end times. Why are they concerned about the end of the world and the end of time?
Yeah.
Because there's so much confusion in the world and in the church today. There never was this much confusion in the church. I've been in the church all of my life. You have too. We've never seen anything like this. And I also am a student of history. I love history. And in the history of the church, I've never seen anything like this. Like I just haven't.
Okay.
This, I think, pushes people to the conclusion that these somehow must be the final days, the end times. And then what people do is this. And again, I understand this. I'm not criticizing it. I get it. But they find prophecies. They look for prophecies. They look here, they look there for any clues that they can get about the idea of the final days of the end of time. Now, here's the problem with that. I've seen so many articles, so many reports on this apparition, that apparition, and recognized and unrecognized, where they're talking about the end of time, the end of times, the coming of the second coming of Christ, the end of the world. This, you know what I'm talking about.
Yes.
Here's the problem with this. I'm not saying that those aren't valid. They may very well be valid. But I keep going back to what Christ said, that nobody knows that data.
The day or the hour.
No, nobody knows that.
Yeah.
And when I keep hearing from people that they do know it,
yeah,
I'm concerned for them, because who do I believe? Do I believe them, or do I believe what Christ said? And I'm sure that if our Lord wanted to, he could have told the apostles and his blessed mother exactly when the end of the world was going to be, what have you. He didn't. All right. For his own reasons, he knew better. Let's say, being God gave him a little bit of an advantage, I would say, right? He knew all of this. He didn't find it necessary for us to know. Now, that brings me back to this. I keep repeating this story. St. Philip Neri, playing cards. What would you do if you knew the end of the world was coming next week? This priest said, I'd run off and reconcile with my brother. The other one said, I'd do this, I'd do that. And Philip Neri said, I continue playing cards. Right? And now, that's maybe a little bit too cavalier, but the idea is there. What would you change if you're living your life correctly? Yeah. You're living a good Catholic life. You're following the precepts that you know of the church, and you're striving every day for more union with God. What would you change? I mean, why would you be upset that the world is coming to an end tomorrow at 5:00 in the afternoon? What difference does that really, truly, and I mean that, what real difference does that make? To me, it's never made any major difference. But I see so many people running from here to there, trying to figure this out. Again, I understand their confusion, because God knows we are in a state of confusion today. And much of that state of confusion was brought about by churchmen.
Yes.
Okay. Yes, not by lay people, by churchmen. You've got the laity upset about it, but the responsibility lies squarely at the feet of clerics.
Okay.
All I can say to people is this: look, read, search if you want to. But in ultimate analysis, you don't know, and you're never going to know because God didn't want you to know for his own
All right.
reasons.
All
Right?
right. Yes. Okay.
And I just wanted to get that message out because a lot of people are concerned, and I know they are concerned. I want them to be to understand that we understand that, but at the same time, you know, there's a lot of hope and faith that you have to put in God. God knows what God does. Just
All
go
right.
with it, go along with the program of a Christian Catholic life.
Okay. So there we've reached our first conclusion. Go along with the program as if you will continue your life and not confront the end of the world, but you will be living a full and rounded and profound Christian life without a type of anxiety that tomorrow the scroll will roll up and the heavens and will turn into fire and the earth into a lake of fire, and the world will
Robert,
end.
just stop for a second. Just what you got done saying, just what you finished saying. All of those things are out of our control. They're beyond our control. Whether if they happen, they're out of our control, right? What do? We go along with it. Just let me say this too, and I know I've said this before, but every day that I say Mass, I try to concentrate during the Mass on saying that Mass as if it were the first, last, and only Mass that I'm saying. Now, that comes and goes during the Mass, okay? But there are moments, especially at the consecration, that I try my best to do everything most reverently as if this were the last Mass I was going to say.
Oh, that's
And I
very
think
good.
that's kind of the way, and I'm far from perfect in this, believe me, but I'm striving for that. And I strive for that daily. I think that's what Christ is asking of us, that we strive for perfection. We're not going to be perfect, but that we strive for perfection and not to worry ourselves about things that we cannot control. That's
Okay.
all.
So we've kind of de-emphasized the eschaton, the last things, the end of all things, and re-emphasized the sanctification or salvation or redemption of the world occurring through the sacrifice of Jesus in a particular way on Calvary 2,000 years ago at a certain historical moment under Pontius Pilate, the procurator of the Romans in Jerusalem at that time, who set free Barabbas and condemned Jesus, and he suffered death, the death of a criminal on a cross, shocking and astounding many of the Jews of the time who said the Messiah could not suffer such a crucifixion, that this therefore meant he was not the Messiah. And then rising on the third day from the dead, and therefore reversing the death that entered the world with the sin of Adam and Eve. And then the church carries on that sacrifice in the Mass, and you, each day, as a priest who celebrates the Mass, are celebrating it as if it was the first or the last or the eternal Mass that you celebrate. This is what you said.
And you as a layman who attend Mass daily are hearing and participating in that unbloody sacrifice of Calvary in a different way, not in the same way as the priest, but to the fullness of your participation as a layperson. Yes, that's exactly it. And this has been going on for 2,000 years, and it's going to continue going on until I think 5 minutes before the whole planet is no longer here. It's going to continue. This is going on. It's been going on for 2,000 years, and it will continue. And it's a beautiful sacrifice and perpetual sacrifice. That's what's important. That's what's important. Our spiritual lives are important.
Okay.
The chaos around us, not so.
All right.
Not
So sort of forget the chaos in a sense, and retire or retreat into a space where the sacrifice of Christ centers the whole universe. On this third planet from the sun, the Lord came. He fulfilled the prophecies about him, and he instituted the Eucharist, and he instituted the church. He stayed with us even though he ascended into heaven. He's poured out his Spirit upon us, and you are a priest of Jesus Christ. Which reminds me, the man behind me, as I'm sitting here in the Franciscan habit, do you see that?
Yes, I do. I was going to ask you. That's new, isn't it?
Yeah, that's my father's brother. That's my uncle.
Very good.
And he was a missionary in Bolivia, actually. And he came from Haverhill, Massachusetts. His name was Robert Moynihan.
A good name, Robert Moynihan.
I took my name from him because my father knew that as a priest he would have spiritual children, but he would not have physical children. And he said, I'll therefore name you after my brother.
He did well.
And he was a man a little bit like you, Father Murr.
Poor guy.
Well, he was
I thought you said he was successful.
He was a wonderful man, and he always looked at the best side of things, and he always encouraged everyone who was faltering, and I appreciate him so much. And he also, and my father had a very close relationship, and my father left his seminary diary to me. And my father spent 3 years in the minor seminary from age 15 to 18.
Oh.
Out at Callicoon, New York, in the Franciscan Seraphicum, St. Joseph's Seminary, and out near Buffalo. And he decided to leave, and he went into the Marine Corps, and he actually was in the same barracks as George C. Scott, who played Patton. And I've got a picture over here.
You mean the real George C. Scott, the actor, not Patton?
My dad and he were friends in the Marine Corps barracks in the late 1940s in Washington, D.C. And or at Paris Island. They were both together. And my dad said to me, I did not find the calling or hear the calling to become the highest thing that a man can be, a priest of God.
Well, I've heard that from a lot of people. It's humbling to hear that. It's humbling to hear that because so many of us who were convinced that we heard it, and we did hear it, have said goodbye to that, to what we heard. Walked away.
Now that's something else, which circles us back to this apocalyptic question, the end of the world. In the book of Revelation, it speaks of 1/3 of the stars of heaven falling from the heavens. After the Second Vatican Council, nearly 1/3 of all the 400,000 priests in the Catholic Church, more than 100,000, decided to leave the priesthood during the next decade or so. And they say Paul VI, as Pope, in 1969, 1970, 71, 72, he died in 78, he would sign laicizations for priests, weeping at his desk by the dozens and by the hundreds.
You've got to wonder what he was thinking when he was signing those things.
Well,
Let me put it clearer. A lot of the responsibility for those men leaving and women leaving, we lost 500,000 nuns.
Yeah.
500,000 nuns by 1975. Imagine that. Didn't die. They quit. They left their vows.
Almost unbelievable.
It is unbelievable. And I've got to tell you something too that I've been thinking about during I don't know why, but during the last week or so, I find myself getting a little bit perturbed. Well, I do know why. I went back to my high school yearbook
Hmm.
and just paged through it, which I haven't done in years.
Hmm.
And I got angry looking at the Christian Brothers and the Sisters of St. Joseph. We had both of them teaching us in high school.
Hmm.
Who, Robert, they not only went through their own crisis of vocation.
Yeah.
I'm talking about 1965 to 1970, right?
Yeah.
In those years, they took us with them.
Yes.
This is what really irritated me. We were part of their crisis.
Well,
They made it part of it. They made it, but they passed it on to us. It was really unfair the way they were educating in those years. And so many of my classmates, from the Christian Brothers Boys High School, and the girls were the Sisters of St. Joseph's. I think the 80% of them are non-practicing Catholics today. And it's because of the malformation that we received during those years. Those were tough times. They're still tough times, but those were particularly bad.
Yeah, I mean, we've got different directions we could take this conversation, and I don't know if our readers, our listeners will have their own thoughts on what we really should talk about. But I do think we have to say that there was something, and this has become a central point of the thought of Archbishop Vigano, but it's also something that was central to the Jesuit order itself, which made decisions in its general congregation starting in 65, and then later on in each decade they have a meeting, and they wanted to become men for others rather than sort of evangelists of Christ in the first instance. They decided a kind of love of neighbor and sacrifice for neighbor was in fact bringing the Logos into the world. And in all of this, they went along with an idea in the Second Vatican Council, which did occur and did last for 4 years, 1962, 63, 64, 65. And I was a little boy at the time. At that time, the Latin was still used in the church, in the Mass, in the United States, in America. And I heard it, and I even used it as an altar boy. And it wasn't regarded as extraordinary, but ordinary, but very austere and very venerable and very ancient and very unifying in a certain sense, because we all use the same language around the entire world. And in the 60s, a council was held, which was said to be pastoral and had only one point: to teach what was the consolidated, understood, accepted, dogmatic truth of the church in a more efficient and effective and fruitful way to all the peoples of the earth. This was the official point of the Second Vatican Council, to change pastorally anything the church was doing in order to make all of her teachings about Christ's salvific action in the world more accessible, understandable, etc. And it was under this, first, this is why people say it was not a doctrinal or dogmatic council, because it was agreed nothing of the teaching needed to be changed. It only needed to be more effectively promoted. And that's why, of all the councils of the church, only Vatican II said we will not deal with doctrinal errors, with heresies. We will deal only, because we are in a time where everybody agrees. They said we all agree on the faith. We're going to try to teach it more effectively, but this makes it a unique council. The other aspect of that council is that the forces of liberal humanism, you may call them, very powerful in Western Europe and the United States, which had triumphed over the forces of National Socialism in Germany and was confronting communism in Russia, had a very profound influence on the Second Vatican Council. They were those influences were to democratize the church, make it suitable to be a partner of the Anglo-American world effort to create a post-World War II order in the world, which would open the world to commerce and to prosperity and to modern science and communications, and have the church be part of that. And we see these various consequences of the council as a result of this revolution that did occur at the Second Vatican Council.
That's right. I disagree with one thing that you said, though, and it's not that it's not. Yeah, well, it's not that you said it. It's that it is believed. Of course, the Second Vatican Council declared itself that it wasn't going to be dogmatic. They weren't going to change dogma. When in effect they did.
Okay, I can accept that. Actually,
ultimately, as it went on, they did change. They changed the mentality. They changed how people looked at everything, and many people lost their faith because they kind of threw out the baby with the bathwater. Right. They really did. And it's almost what I was thinking about the last couple of weeks when I told you going through my yearbook. I just thought to myself, it's look, you're talking about the Jesuits. Here's the thing. Here's what the Jesuits and here's what the Franciscans and here's what the Dominicans and here's what all of them tried to do in years past. They were educators. Their idea was to educate, and especially the Jesuits were in the business of educating the world's leaders, whether they be political leaders, industrialists, what have you. And to try to get into the world through these people, through their students, Christian principles. That was the idea. Somewhere along the line, let me just put it this way. If a Jesuit or Jesuits found that there was a need in the community for a soup kitchen, they could convince through education some of their students to open that soup kitchen and to run it. I know this. What happened was they left education and they opened the soup kitchen.
Yeah.
So therefore, nobody's teaching the future to be the Christians that they should be. And the priests and nuns have involved themselves, many of them, in things that really pertain to lay people. They really do. This is the problem. Also, what was done to the sacraments, and especially to the holy sacrifice of the Mass, is deplorable. It still has to be straightened out, and it will be. I'm convinced that it will be. But it's left in a deplorable state. Robert, I don't know how many people write me and contact me constantly. They can't attend masses in their own parishes.
Yeah.
Still today, this is 50 years after the council.
No. The crisis is continuing, and the popes and the many leaders in the church and many writers thoughtfully have said this is a crisis, so we can't ignore it. And yet at the same time, it will be addressed. And I do think, I myself remember about 1965 or 66, when the Jesuit priest at the University of Connecticut, St. Thomas Aquinas Chapel, where my father was a professor at university, came out in his socks to celebrate Mass without wearing shoes. And I remember as a little boy thinking, he doesn't seem as respectful. Now, there is a type of humility and a type of simplicity in just wearing your socks.
Excuse me, Robert. He had other clothing on, didn't he?
Yeah. He had his vestment.
Hey, excuse me. Today you have to ask.
Yeah. But that's remained all my life as a kind of question mark. And these things cut both ways. There could have been, I suppose, a type of arrogance or of even, you might say, what do we call them? The Pharisees, who put on their fine robes and worship God with all sorts of wonderful motions, but look toward the poor with disdain and toward the suffering without any compassion. So all of us must be compassionate. All of us must look toward the poor with.
Let me just stop you right there too. Let me jump in to say this. Yes, I have never met a priest. I met a bishop. I met a bishop who would fall into that category, but I've never met a priest who dressed up finely investments and disdained the poor. Don't know where these people are. Don't know where those priests are. I never ran into them.
No.
I've known a couple of characters, and some of them have left. But the majority of the priests that I know have been excellent, fine men dedicated to what they're doing. I don't see that there's a disdain for the poor. I never saw that in the church. As a matter of fact, I saw the church caring for the poor. I saw the church opening hospitals, opening orphanages, opening schools that were tuitionless. For God's sake, I've told this before, we paid $15 a year for Catholic school tuition, and we got the best education that was available in the world. It was fantastic. With 53 other students in my class and one nun. We got a better education than all of them. So I never saw that. That there was this disdain for the poor. It's being presented that way today.
Yeah,
but I don't know the truth of it.
Well, obviously what we're doing in this conversation is just touching on one point and another point. It could be volumes to really explain each step in this process. There was a pact of the catacombs by some of the more liberal bishops who were trying to transform the church from a type of hierarchical and sort of ancien regime, European noble institution, and they wanted to be the church of the poor. And they were infiltrated also by communists who wanted the church no longer to be a kind of support of the old capitalist classes. So all these threads were running through. But these things were known very well by both Paul VI, but also by John Paul II and by Pope Benedict, and of course now by Pope Francis. But what we're really talking about is that the dismantling of a pattern of the church cannot lead to the dismantling of the presence of Christ in the church. And that salvific presence, that making holy, sacrifice comes from the word sacrificium, and it comes from sacer, which is to set apart or to make holy, and facere, to make. Sacer, to set apart. And so a sacrifice of a mother for her child or of Jesus of his life is something that makes holy reality and the world. And in its etymological fundamental meaning. And this is what is our response to the fall of man and the fall of the world. And it's happened definitively with what Christ accomplished, but it's also happening in every Christian and in every priest as they continue the sacrifice of the Mass. And it even, and Pope Benedict used to say, every act of charity, every act of love is a participation also in this salvational, logocentric saving of the world, which you started the program by saying was the main thing we should focus on rather than fear of the end of the world.
I still say that. I still say that. Yeah, believe that. I guess what I was trying to say is, I'm disappointed. I'm disappointed that so many people in my generation, so many friends that I went to grade school, high school, college with, have abandoned the Catholic faith, and they've abandoned the Catholic faith. I know why they did.
Well, wait, why did they?
Because it wasn't taught. It wasn't taught.
Okay.
Look, it was not being taught. When you've got people going to Mass and all they get are I was going to say horrific. They're not. They don't even get to horrific. They're just silly songs.
Okay.
I laugh, and we laughed at them in high school. We thought they were ridiculous.
Yeah.
Sons of God, hear His holy word. All of this, it was an insult to a child, and we're supposed to be doing this. They lost everything, most of what the church had that was sacred. You're talking about the sacred. That's what was lost. The idea of the sacred. Everything was brought down to a human level, a secular level. And as a secular and human level, they don't make any sense.
Okay.
The government can do a better job on the secular level than the church can.
Okay,
right?
so you've answered the whole question here. This is our predicament.
How did I do that?
Yeah, you've answered the whole question. The secular confronted the sacred, the awesome holiness of God, His transcendent integrity, his untarnished beauty and perfection was subsumed in silly songs which claimed that they were bringing him closer to us, but in fact were imposing on him and on his holy and awesome nature secular conceptions. So the secular confronted the sacred and covered up the sacred.
Let me put it this way. If I fall in love with a woman and I want that woman to be my wife, I want to be part of her life. I want her as part of my life. I go out to that woman. She's raised in my eyes, maybe not on a pedestal. That sounds too lofty, but she's higher and outside of me. I have to go to her to win her. Right? If she comes down to my level, I'm using this as a man and a woman situation because I saw it that way when I was growing up. You had to win a woman's heart. You were made to jump through some hoops. You really were. And women tested men. I saw it. I lived it. Right? I know what I'm talking about in this. Well, that's gone. All of a sudden, it came down for whatever reason. We're not to get into that. That's 3 more programs. But that coming up to meet, going out and coming up to meet someone, that the touching the sacred has come down to nothing. And when people talk about love today, the majority really aren't talking about love. They're talking about sex. When we were talking about love, we were talking about love. We were talking about something that required sacrifice and that you were going to give your entire life to. Very, very different. But what I'm saying is, when the ideal comes down to a secular level, it's lost. The ideal is lost.
Yeah.
It's supposed to love and sacrifice, and these great ideals that exist because God is their author are to elevate man, not to come down. That's what they did with the Mass. That's what they did with these silly songs. They brought everything down to a level that was frankly intellectually insulting to a child, and they lost us. Okay. If this was what it was, and this is what it's about, people walked away from it, and they're still walking away from it.
Well,
I really think it's time. It has to be. This has to come about, and it will come about. There'll be a change in the liturgy. Let me just do a real quick commercial. Sure. Father Joseph Fezio, who's a good friend of yours and a very good friend of mine, gave a talk at Star of the Sea Parish in San Francisco. You can find it on YouTube, about the liturgy and about Pope Benedict's reform of the reform. It is one of the best talks I've ever heard on the liturgy. And what he does, I'm not going to get into the whole thing. You can watch it. It's about a 50-minute program, and not one moment of it is boring. But what he's saying is that the wrong direction was taken. The wrong direction was taken. And Pope Benedict tried his hardest to get that direction back into control.
Yeah.
All right. But I would encourage anybody who's concerned about what happened to the liturgy, where it went wrong, and what can be done to listen to Father Fezio's talk. It was great. All right, that's my commercial.
Okay, we'll try to find that, put up a link to it, and include it somewhere on our website, and I'll send it out in a letter, and I'll write about this question. But
that would be great.
What we're really saying, you started with the salvific mission of Jesus Christ to save the world. What we're really depressed about is that the things that confront us when there's cruelty, when there's injustice, when there's war, when there's breakdowns in human relations and illness, that they need to be healed. And we're looking for that place, longing for that place where life replaces death, where healing replaces woundedness. And Christ turned the dial of the universe in a different direction when he emptied himself as a divine, infinite value, without compare, without comparison, came into the world and drew the world back towards the sacred and the eternal and the transcendent and the everlasting life and heaven. And the church was continuing this and holding up these ideals, teaching these truths, proclaiming the wonder of the image of God in the human person. But meanwhile, there was the old secular idea that there is no second level, there's no higher world than this. This material reality is all there is.
Yes.
And that produced many fruits in scientific discovery and technology. And it started to conquer and to eliminate the transcendent and to return us all to the dusty pathways of the earth. And now with computers, what we have is a world that's secularized with seemingly semi-divine powers, which the church can no longer compete with or contend with and must somehow accept and even serve. And this is why humanism, which seems to lift up man, but man can't be lifted up unless he transcends his very humanness and becomes truly the image and likeness of God, unless he's Christified or made Christocentric or renewed through all the sacraments of the church, incorporated into Christ. And this is where we are at the crossroads now, whether we are abandoning that good news, that gospel, that message, or whether we will continue to embrace and teach it.
Yes. I think there are basically two kinds of scientists. The ones who get their doctorate degrees and now they know everything and they become specialists and they stay stagnant right there. Many of those are atheists because they figured out everything. Materially speaking, they figured it all out. The other kind are the geniuses, the real thinkers, who, when they reach the doctoral, they finish their doctorate, it doesn't stop there at that apex. It goes out. It goes out.
Yeah,
they understand, and these are brilliant men, and I had some of them as teachers. I think you have too. They knew, they were experts, absolute experts in their field, whether it be biology, chemistry, mathematics, philosophy, theology, whatever it was, they were geniuses. And what made them and helped them to become geniuses was they had enough humility to know that they didn't know everything. And when they reached all they could reach, the high part of study, where they could not read another book and gain any more information. I've met a few of them. They're out there.
Yeah.
They're very few and far between. But it didn't stop there. It opened up. It opened up. They understood how little they understood.
Yeah. That's
those are the people you want to find as teachers.
yeah.
Not the smug who have capsulized all knowledge and it's here and I own it. That's too bad. And many of those are materialists. But I've met many a genius who is a devout and spiritual man and woman because they got to that point and it opened up. It didn't just stop.
Yeah. Well, that's a beautiful description of a truth about true science and true study and the finite and the infinite, the secular and the sacred, the human and the God-centered. There are many who just deny outright that there is a reality that's holy and is eternal and is divine, and they don't discuss it. But the truly thoughtful minds, and even the very best minds that deal with material things and scientific things, do often, in a marvelous way, do what you described and accept everything that we see materially, but recognize that the final cause and the first cause and the cause behind the scenes has to be something more than we can see with us and feel with our senses.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And therein lies wisdom. That's what I'm saying. That those are really the geniuses among men and women. Those people are really the geniuses. And you can only become a genius through humility, not through arrogance and pride.
Okay, so what you're really calling for in the midst of our crisis, which has left millions confused and tens of millions have left the church, have left our churches combining parishes, closing churches, closing schools, ridiculed often in the public square, regarded sometimes now even as a negative factor in society. We're really in a great crisis, but you're calling upon us to kind of renew our studies, renew even deeper and greater wisdom, a renewal of wisdom, and not to accept that through our mistakes and our weaknesses and those of our forefathers, let's just say back to the council, or in this lifetime that you and I have led, 60 or 70 years.
Oh, leave it at 60. That's fine.
Well, but a renewal of wisdom, because it's true. And if we don't keep this doorway open to the sacred, if we don't keep the memory of Christ, we could have a very stark landscape of cruel materialism. And therefore, we must stand and renew Christian wisdom.
Absolutely. I think, Robert, it's also getting into the political sphere just for a moment of consideration.
Okay.
No. I don't want to jump into Republican and Democrat and all of that. No. But I mean, we were talking the other day, a group of friends get together every once in a while. We were talking about dictators and dictatorships. And that's exactly the problem with dictators, is the lack of humility, of real humility, because they know everything. They know absolutely everything, and their word is their rule is the last rule. Blah blah blah. That's it. That's why they're never really successful. When they die or they end their life, usually they die because a real dictator never gives up power. Never. They take it last 3 hours after they're dead.
No, that's.
But when they leave, nobody's there to pick up the pieces. Many times,
You said something very important. And some of these dictators are extremely talented,
Yes.
no doubt.
Yes.
Maybe almost as close as a man can be to be a leader.
Many of them are great organizers. I'll give them that.
But what you've implicitly said is that the greatest thing in our humility, which is not something to be scorned, it's something that's really very true. We are very limited, and even if we're geniuses, we're limited.
Thomas Aquinas defines humility as honesty.
Okay.
Yes. He says it's simply being honest about yourself.
And this is the month of Thomas Aquinas, January, and in 2023 and 2024 occur several anniversaries of his birth. I think it was 1224. So it's 800 years since his birth. And then he died in 74. He was 49.
You know, Robert, this is getting me feeling very old. I was there for his 750th birthday.
And now it's the 800. Yeah.
You're just making me recall right now. We went to the Angelicum for a party of the whole university at the Angelicum. They were throwing a party for his 750th birthday. And now you're telling me he turns 800.
Yes. Okay. The Angelicum, of course, angelic doctor.
Angelic doctor.
That was Thomas Aquinas. They called him the Doctor Angelicus. That's why the University of Thomas Aquinas in Rome is called the Angelicum.
Right.
Just a little. Okay. So Thomas Aquinas wrote the Summa Theologica, and he had several people in front of him who he dictated to, and they would write down a sentence, and then he would go to the next sentence. That's how this enormous book could be written by a man in the Middle Ages who didn't have a computer. And he came toward the end of his life, and he went into a church, and he had a kind of mystical experience of the presence of God. He felt the Holy Spirit, or the holiness of God. He encountered God, we might say.
He had, Robert, a flash of the beatific vision.
Yeah. And after that, he said, I now understand that all my writing is as straw. He made that remark. He said, everything I have written is as straw compared to what I have seen and understood in a few seconds or maybe a few minutes. I don't know how long his vision lasted.
Matter of seconds, according to him, a matter of seconds. Yep.
Yeah. So, with the question of dictators, humility, the question of secular and sacred, the question of the greatness and the weakness of man, the question of the fate of our civilization and of our church, all intersect at this point. Aquinas encountered and saw the divine, and it surpassed the greatest theological work that any Catholic theologian has ever done, the Summa Theologica of Thomas Aquinas, where he answered every question in a beautiful, thoughtful, clear, impressive way. And he said, all of my answers is nothing in comparison to the encounter, the presence of Almighty God, of the Holy Spirit.
And to the point that you were discussing previously, and the reason that I brought up Thomas Aquinas was to define humility.
Yeah.
And Thomas Aquinas defines humility with one word: truth. Yeah. Humility is the truth about ourselves. It's taking away everything that is superfluous, all of the frills, and just ourselves. And if we look at that, we are truthful with that, we are humbled. We are humbled. None of us has too much to be proud of.
Right?
And that is the beginning of wisdom.
And yet that wisdom that finally comes includes the fact that Jesus loved these poor, humble creatures, very limited creatures, sufficiently to die for us. And that the world, the God loved creating in these persons whom we are, these sort of vortexes of Robert and Charles and everyone who's listening to us, each person is a unique, irrepeatable, and profound and infinite value in the image and likeness of God. And yet we are very humble and limited. But something about us has a value which is incalculable. And this is the personal element, the person, the soul, we would call it in the old theology. And the soul is worth saving. We cannot allow the soul to be discarded or to be lost or to be damned lightly.
No, lightly, not at all. It's everything. It's everyone's everything.
Yeah. So we've started talking about the end of the world. People are afraid of it. And of course, the old argument everyone makes is that each of us does have an end coming. And it's not so far for any of us. It doesn't pass thousands of years from now. It passes 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 years. So the story Jesus said, and told repeatedly, was keep your candle lit. Keep the oil, keep sufficient supply of the oil. So therefore, we should return to our renewing of Christian wisdom in an age where it's rejected and forgotten. And that's the edifice that we can build, even if the walls of the physical churches collapse. We can renew the tradition of Christian wisdom in our time.
Two simple jokes come to mind that I think illuminate what you're talking about. Somebody asked me not too long ago what I would do, sort of a la Philip Neri, right? What would I do if I knew that the world was going to end in 50 years? And he could give me the date that it was going to end. And, I think, wow. Well, it is going to end in 50 years for me.
Yes.
How about you, Robert? But for 50 years, I think it's going to end soon, much sooner than that. My end is coming, and of that I can be sure, right? But we're astounded with all these things that are fantastic, and they don't change our lives. The other story that I was going to tell you was about the scientist who was giving a talk at one of the universities, and he came to the conclusion. He said, and to wrap this up, in conclusion, in 100 million years, no, what did he say? Yes, in 100 million years, the sun will collide with the earth, and all human life will be finished. And there's a woman in the audience raised her hand frantically. She said, "How many years?" He said, 100 million, madam. 100 million. She said, "Oh, thank God! I thought you said a million." There's a point that it doesn't matter. It doesn't really truly matter. What matters is my end is coming real soon, and I have to have my house in order. I'm not responsible for the salvation of the entire world. I can do what I can do to help people along the way. I'm responsible for the salvation of my soul, and that's a big responsibility. Everyone has that. Everyone carries that, and so I think instead of looking all over the place for what's happening and the most sensational revelation and this, whoa, bring it back home. Okay. Bring it down to earth.
There's one question before we end. As one seeks to do what you just said, to save one's soul, what do you do about offenses that you've committed against others during your lifetime? Some of them may have passed away, some people are still alive, and you never reconciled. And maybe you never did what was necessary to ask forgiveness of someone whom you offended.
Well, let's start. What an excellent question that is. And Robert, it's like you're reading my mind, because I've been going through some of that. Every once in a while, I remember this one, and I remember that one, and I remember an unkind reaction. Um,
Say it ain't so. Say it's not so, Father Murphy.
say it ain't so. That's right, Joe. Say it ain't so. But yeah, I remember these things. I remember losing patience with people that I love, and
Mhm.
being and kind of a sharp tongue reaction to things. And I stopped during the day, and it's funny because the older you get, the more those thoughts come. The more those thoughts come back, you think you're losing your memory. Mine is becoming quite acute,
Okay.
especially to the faults in life. Well, I stop and I say, first of all, I don't recognize the death of the dead.
Mm. I see.
The atheist recognizes the death of the dead. For the atheist, when you bury somebody, that's it. You buried everything. There's nothing there. I don't believe that at all. Never did believe that. The man and woman or child has a soul, and that soul is still alive. That soul is still alive. And if they're in heaven, they can hear us. And if they're in purgatory, they can hear us. Perhaps even if they're in hell, they can hear us. I don't know about hell, but I do know about purgatory and heaven, because my prayers can change and affect their outcome. I can participate still in their salvation if they're in purgatory. And if they're in heaven, there is no such thing as a wasted prayer. It,
I
it
see,
goes,
sir.
goes elsewhere. So what do? As a matter of fact, I'm laughing because I did this just this morning.
Oh
I had to
no.
take a, I had to take a drive, and I'm driving alone on this long, windy country road. And I remembered something. I remembered something a way I answered wrong. I answered incorrectly to somebody. It was wrong. And I said the name of that person. I said, I'm sorry. I should have said sorry before now. I hadn't thought about it in years. I'm sorry, but I'm going to keep you in my next rosary. All right? Good. Done. And there are some people, and I've known these people, and they really do exist. There are some people who are, well, how else do I say it? They're quite wealthy, and they come toward the end of their life, and they realize things that they've done wrong. A lot of wealthy people, Robert, just between you and me and the four walls here,
Oh no.
have gained a lot of their wealth by sort of dishonest means. A lot
Oh
of them.
boy.
Yeah, a lot of them. Yes, they have. And they know that. They know that. And when they come toward the end of their lives, they recognize that. Well, what did they do? I've talked to these people. They've come to me with that problem.
I
I said,
see.
well, all right. Why don't you write a check to a charity? There's Samaritan Hospital that needs funding. There's this, there's that, all sorts of things. All you have to do is open your eyes. And you know what? More than one of them would say, well, why don't I leave you the money, Father? And you can. I said, absolutely not. You don't leave the money to me. You go directly to where it's needed.
I
Bypass
see.
me completely. Just take my advice. Use that money and they have. Look, I know that it happens because I saw the results. I've seen people leave money to charities all over the world, and that's their way of paying back, of making restitution. There's something too that we forget. We forget when we go to confession, because again, nobody's really been catechized for half a century. When we steal, we have to make restitution for that money, or for those things that we've taken. We don't just say, I'm sorry, and you're forgiven. You have to make restitution for them. If somebody comes and says to me, I'm sorry, I stole $5 from you, will you forgive me? My
Hmm.
answer, my answer will be, yes, I forgive you. Now, where's my $5?
Hmm. Okay.
Those are two different actions. So a lot of people can't do that because a
Yeah.
lot of people have taken from people who are dead now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And how do you do that? You do it by acts of charity. And we were always taught that. And I know people did that. This is not talked about much today. You know what? Another thing too, Robert, as long as we're on it, people in their wills, and when I was a boy, this was common. It was common. People in their wills would leave money to the church, or or they would leave money for masses to be said for their souls.
Yeah.
I, what happened to that? What happened to that? That just simply ended. And there's so many things that should be done, but restitution is important. And even in asking forgiveness. Now, the person that I asked forgiveness to this morning has been dead for 35 years, 40 years,
Oh, boy.
right? It came back to me, and in the moment I said, you know what, so and so, I forgot. I never said I'm sorry for this. I said something unkind. I said something that was wrong. I'm sorry, and I'll remember you in prayer. Now, I could also say, I'll remember you the next time I give alms to a beggar or to a hospital, to some place that needs it. There are many ways of doing it, but we mustn't just think, well, I asked forgiveness and that's it. No, it's a little bit more. Justice demands more than that.
Okay,
There is
Father.
God, but there's also his justice, and they go hand in hand.
I think that's very beautiful, and I think we're coming to a conclusion now. And this fits with this concern about the world coming to an end and the terrible crises humanity is facing. Because as the virgins were waiting with their lamps lit for the return home of the master of the house, and their lamps were going out, they also were preparing the house. They were sweeping it. They were making sure maybe all the counters were clean. So as we look toward whatever end, whether personal death or the end of the world, our concern should be to sweep the house of our soul and to do what we can in the world to prepare for the return of the Lord. And therefore, these actions of restitution, of repentance, of confession, and of charity would be a fitting way to live and to prepare for the return of the Lord, even if the world would come to an end.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. Yes.
So that seems a noble thing to do, to restore the tradition of Christian wisdom, which based on the humility, but also the great dignity of the human person, and face these 60 years of confusion by renewed study and renewed profound understanding of our nature and our predicament, and to repent and make restitution for things in order to prepare for the end.
And Robert, just a little sprinkling of humility. Just a little sprinkling of humility. God love you, my friend. We'll talk to you next week.
Thank you, Father Maher.
Thank you very much, Robert. Always a delight. Thank you.